to Season 7, Episode 9 of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop.
I'm Mark Bishop.
We are, of course, reading Peter Kreeft's A Refutation of Moral Relativism, Interviews with an Absolutist, this time talking about Interview 9, the arguments for moral absolutism. So we've kind of looked in the past at some of the arguments in favor of moral relativism. We have like the absolutist character refuting those. Now he's putting forward his own arguments here. He has several of them. I think it was 5 total that he kind of went through pretty quickly here. What do you think of this chapter?
Good. It's a good read. If you're looking for a real detailed argument in favor of moral absolutism, I don't think this is really the book. It's a way to quickly explain the point of view. But he has 7 arguments for moral absolutism in this chapter in under 15 pages.
Yeah.
So just put that in perspective to anybody who's thinking about getting the book. There are, it's more of a cursory argument, I think. Don't you think?
I think so. And I think this chapter was a little bit more, what'd you say?
It was effective. Right.
Yes. No, I think this chapter was a little bit more repetitive than past chapters. I feel like, for the past, all the chapters before this, there was some new spin being put on it. But I feel like this chapter, more than the others, felt a little bit more like a rehash of stuff that we've already heard. But I mean, it's still well written. It was still, effective, like you said. But I think it didn't provide as much new information that we as much as we got like in the past few chapters.
True, and it was more of a restatement.
Yeah.
Of past arguments with a little bit more, fleshing some of it out a little bit. So let's get into it. So there's obviously back and forth, which is it's a good read. It's a fun read because you kind of get. It's not only the topic that we care about is moral absolutism and moral relativism, but it's also kind of it's well written in that you kind of get to know the characters a little bit. The fictional characters are having this debate or this interview or whatever it's going to be, depending on the chapter, and I enjoy that, because they're consistent throughout the book. You would expect them to make these, and there's asides that we don't really get into. So I do like how it's written. Anyway, so the 7 arguments are very quickly stated, the topics of the argument, I guess you'd say, 136 of the book. We're quickly approaching the end, I think. Anyway, are arguments from consequences, like the consequences of the philosophy, from consensus, arguments from experience, from a moral argument, and arguments from moral language, which I thought you'd be more interested in than some, which was really brief. The self-contradiction argument, which I think is they just said, we already mentioned that. I don't even think they even talked about it, if I remember correctly. And then the self-contradiction argument. So there's 7, but they really only talk about, I think, 5, really in any sort of detail. So the first one is from consequences. So this is I think it was mentioned in previous chapters. It's the argument that is, okay, all right, well, when you have moral relativism, it's really more like, he's more like trying to refute relativism in this chapter. He is arguing for absolutism, but I guess if it's a zero-sum argument in the way it's framed, because a lot of times he's just saying, well, it's better than moral relativism, because ideas have consequences, as he says in this chapter. We should evaluate ideas by their practical consequences. And then he didn't really talk about the benefits, so to speak, of moral absolutism. He really just poops on the consequences of moral relativism.
Which is, I think, why it's very similar to the past chapters, because that was a very similar reasoning to when he was refuting the arguments for relativism that Libby, the relativist character, proposed. So I feel like it's somewhat of the same argument that he's just running through here.
Yes, agreed. Yeah, because he doesn't actually put forth an affirmative, because you could just have, well, we're just not going to even talk about morality. We're just going to talk about, a utility argument, or, what is, what is the best practical, but a lot of moral relativism, but you can just say, okay, we're just going to have these rules, whether they're from God or not, but these are the rules that we're all going to follow, maybe a vote on them every 10 years or something. Well, that's not a moral absolutist position. That is an absolute position on what are the rules that we're going to follow. I mean, but in a sense, it's a moral structure. It's really more an ethical structure, and then you could change them every 10 years. But you can have them set in stone legally. Okay, we're going to say, you can't kill unless it's under these circumstances, but we're all going to vote, and everybody agrees now, but in 10 years, we're going to look at it again. So
Hmm.
that's not, I don't really consider that moral absolutism.
Yeah.
But so anyway, so I just don't think there's any arguments about, okay, why do we have to have, or why should we
Hmm.
have? Well, really, I guess the argument is, why do we have to have moral absolutism? And he doesn't make that case, but he does.
Yeah.
I mean, I do like how he poops on the moral relativism, and again, kind of expands on this
Hmm.
argument that the relativists aren't tolerant
Hmm.
of opinions or persons. They're just tolerant of evil.
Yeah. I do
So,
like I do like what he says before that, because he asks Libby, the relativist character, what is the consequence of moral relativism? She says tolerance. He agrees with her, but he says, he pulls a quote from Chesterton. He said that tolerance is the one value you have left when you've lost all your principles. If you want to do bad things, you tolerate them in others so that at least you're not a hypocrite. And so he says, well, yeah, of course, relativism leads to tolerance. And he says tolerance of evil, just so you don't feel like a hypocrite. You're going to tolerate all of these evil things so you yourself don't feel bad. You don't feel like a hypocrite for the things that you're doing.
right, right, and that's really the gist of his argument. But it's not really an argument for absolutism again. So
Hmm.
yeah, he talks about, but he does talk about, the consequences of a moral relativism is the removal of deterrence. Moral
Hmm.
absolutism he does make this case. It does make it sets absolute rules and principles by which you evaluate specific circumstances. So in the consequences of that are, you have a consistent moral philosophy for everybody, as opposed
Hmm.
to you're just arguing over stuff all the time. And he mentions, well, the sinners and saints discussion where she says, well, aren't all sinners, aren't all saints sinners? And he says, yeah, but no saints are relativists.
Hmm.
Truly saintly people, really good people. The people that we admire and respect are moral absolutists. You're not
Hmm.
relativists. They're not saying, oh, you can do whatever you want, but I kind of chose a good path. No, they all had a fundamental belief that what they were doing was necessary and right, and would share that with others. So I think, and then he talks. I think he talks in this here at this point. Oh yeah, that the society functions better.
Hmm.
Not only is it better for the individual, but for the society. All through time, human history, the quality of life is better. The longevity, people lived longer and they had more stability and peace when you had rulers in a society, especially that had certain moral absolutist, whatever those absolutist policies or philosophies are. And then he mentions, well, if you have moral relativists, you have murderous, lying, horrible leaders in society, and it's short lived.
Hmm.
And she says, well, there's not that many of them. He says, well, that's true. It's a relatively new philosophy, but you got Chairman Mao and you got Mussolini as examples, who were really moral relativists. Now, Mao, I would say, I guess you'd say he had situational ethics. Whatever situation benefited him was
Hmm.
fine, especially if he could kill people and divorce his wife or marry a new wife.
Hmm.
I'm plowing through an old biography of Mao right now,
Hmm.
uh, and it's hard for me to read. So it's a really good book, but it's hard to read because I keep rooting for other characters, even other communists, to figure out. Man, you got to kill this guy. He's going to kill you. Do you know that he is planning to kill you? You should kill him now.
That's funny.
Don't wait. You have the opportunity. There's a whole bunch of opportunities early
Hmm.
on when they were struggling between them and the nationalists run by Chiang Kai-shek. At the same time that Japan has invaded China,
Hmm.
Russia's meddling in there and funding, the communists, and Mao is undercutting, and he's just such a terrible person. Anyway, but he was a moral relativist, but I don't know that he did anything on a moral code. It was just whatever benefited him.
Hmm. Well, it's
Uh,
like the Beatles said, if you go around carrying pictures of Chairman Mao, you're not going to make it with anyone anyhow. So there you go.
True.
They're wise beyond their years.
Yes.
That's my quote of wisdom for the day.
I think, wasn't that after they had gone to that yogi in India or Pakistan or something, or
Yeah.
was the Buddhists, wherever
Because
they went
that was the
on.
song Revolution, which was on, I think, the White album originally was released as a single. They had a couple different recordings of it. So it'd have been like 68. So it'd have been in their like Hindu phase. Yeah.
But I think if I remember correctly, that was written around the time where they realized they were being misled.
Mm,
This guy was just because they went in for it, and it sounds great at first, but then you realize this guy's just doing this to get chicks. He's just trying to get underage girls. That's exactly what he was doing. Um, which is like what they all do.
yeah.
Golly,
Well, more relativists.
yes. I was about to go on a funny and inappropriate rant, and I restrained myself.
I'm almost disappointed.
Well, you're not underage, but you're my son, so let's not go that direction. So the second argument, well, it was really kind of very similar to the first one, I
Mhm.
thought, which
Argument
was
from consensus. Yeah.
yeah, the consensus. Well, everybody kind of agrees over time of human history that
Hmm.
this is the case. If you look over time in all societies, they had some sort of this is our belief system, and if you don't believe in that system, then we're going to have to kill you.
Hmm.
Burn them at the stake or whatever. And who was I was just reading about that? I was like, oh yeah, it was it Thomas More? Yeah, St. Thomas More. So I joined the St. Thomas More Society. There's a legal society or whatever. And I was trying to remind myself, okay, he's the King Henry VIII guy, right? Because
Hmm.
he wouldn't sign off on, I think it was a marriage annulment, if I remember correctly, and then a new marriage to a new gal. And but he didn't actually oppose it. He was just like, okay, I gotta quit. And
Yeah.
that he couldn't even do that. So it's he kind of wasn't really the paragon of bravery or virtue at the
Hmm.
beginning, but then he stuck to it. He's like, "No,
Hmm.
I'm just not going to do it." And
He's
then
got a great quote though. Great
yeah,
like final words. The I remain the king's good servant, but God's first.
yes, and I think that's a okay quote, but screw that guy. I mean, why would you say I'm his servant? You know what? F you. You and your dirty whore wife. you know, why wouldn't why wouldn't you say that? You philandering, lying, murderous jackass. I'm God's servant. F you. Cut off my head. Whatever you're gonna do. Do it. I like. I don't know who Victor Davis Hanson got this quote from, but he's quoting somebody, and I'm too lazy to look it up. But he says, at some point we have to say, "You do your worst, and I'll do my best, and we'll see how it all works out." And I think that's a good life philosophy. Especially in politics and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
or debates about morality. You say you do your worst, I'll do my best, and then and then everything will sort out one way or the other, and we'll just both have to live with it. And I think that's a better quote. But
Yeah,
anyway,
I agree.
so how did I get on there?
I don't
I guess
know. But I do like the point that he makes in here talking about the consensus. He says to be a relativist, you have to be a snob because you have to believe that nearly all of the human beings who have ever lived in this world, especially the greatest sages and saints and prophets, they have all based their lives on an illusion, a fantasy, a myth. And that's one of my biggest problems, I think, with like the modern idea of, progress above all else is like people just inherently think that they and everything about society is better now just because it's happening now and
Mm,
not happening 800 years ago. And it's like, well, we automatically think that we are just infinitely superior to all of these. I think he even gives Libby he calls people savages, or she does, but 2 billion savages can't be wrong. And I think
yes,
that's a pretty common idea, that people think that anybody that came before us is just a stupid savage that don't have the ideas of science and medicine and technology that we have now, and they were just fundamentally wrong about everything. And I
right,
think it is a byproduct of that relativism, the very self-centeredness, the very selfishness there.
true. I guess I was talking about consensus somehow, but anyway,
Yes, I don't know.
those are good points. Thanks for redirecting me.
You're
And
welcome.
I like how he to this consensus argument. He mentions, like all throughout time, as you mentioned, all these people were absolutists, but he mentions that as a percentage of humans, moral relativists are a minority, almost totally concentrated in one civilization, the modern West, which I
Hmm.
think is pretty much true. And then he calls it apostate Christianity,
Hmm.
apostate Christendom, and
Hmm.
I think that's really true.
Yeah.
It's only in our areas really that this is where people just fell away from the church or ran away from the
Hmm.
church, as the case may be, And that's really where this philosophy has taken hold
Hmm.
with the people in power. And I think you're 100% right. Is the arrogance and
Hmm.
the fact that their parents and grandparents and great grandparents were so successful as moral absolutists
Hmm.
in creating this society of wealth and leisure, and they don't realize, well, that's a part of the mix.
Yeah.
It's not just these really smart scientists that came up with the television and the remote control
Hmm.
and mass production of food. But they had a moral philosophy that made all that possible. And I
Hmm.
did. But and she does mention, which is I was waiting for the counter argument, which you just mentioned, like 2 billion savages can't be wrong argument, which is making light of the fact that we don't vote on this.
Yeah. And I
Either
do
right
like
or
how he
wrong.
addresses that a little bit because she says, you're telling the truth. Are you telling the truth by counting noses now? He says, no, it's only a probable argument. And I think that's an important thing to include. This does not prove it's automatically correct.
Yeah.
But he's saying, well, I'm putting it in your terms. It should appeal to egalitarians like you who argue against absolutism because you say it's connected with snobbery. And then he quotes, Chesterton as, defining, tradition as the extension of egalitarianism to the past, calling it the extension of the franchise to vote to people who are disenfranchised, not by accident of birth, but by accident of death. And so having that like egalitarian mindset. And I really like that quote from Chesterton there. But I think it's important to differentiate that just because more people have believed it doesn't automatically make it true. But we should acknowledge that this is a thing that tradition has proved true in some ways, and we should respect that.
Yes. Well, it goes back to the old argument between a conservative and a liberal when they come up, or a leftist or whatever, when they come upon a fence in a field.
Hmm.
The liberal wants to, we need to tear down these barriers and have freedom, blah blah blah, and the
Hmm.
conservative says, well, you know what, we need to find out why this fence was built in the first place.
Yeah, yeah,
I
exactly.
mean, it might be keeping us out of danger, or it could be keeping danger away from us.
Hmm.
So let's find out why first. Is that thinking of, okay, the wisdom of the past. They may have had good reason, for all this stuff and these
Hmm.
beliefs. But it's not. Again, it's not something that proves that they were right. It's just you ought to consider it, and maybe there's a probability that it's right if everybody agrees to it over time, and we have had a lot of progress. I think that's a really good argument for Christianity, quite
Yeah.
frankly, because if you look historically, what is really the big boom in truth and justice, scientific endeavors, and coming out of famine and all that stuff? It's a combination of Christian ideals, true Christian ideals, and the free market system, which they kind of melded together
Hmm.
eventually into a regulated capitalist society with underlying belief in the Ten Commandments plus Jesus's philosophy of forgiveness and love. Um, and I think that's a very powerful combination.
Hmm.
But you don't see that kind of really blossoming
Hmm.
in any other religious era.
Hmm.
Um, I guess you could argue about some of the Asian countries, I guess. But like Judaism, of course, everybody wants to kill the Jews, evidently. So that kind of inhibits their growth. Like what? Of course, everyone wanted to kill the Christians too, or at least a
Hmm.
lot of Roman Empire, and they're like, oh yeah, well, we'd like for you to
Yeah.
kill us.
Well, I think that
What?
goes back to the to the idea about the apostate Christendom too. Is like the only places where we see that people have enough leisure and free time and nothing better to do than to think about moral relativism is coming to these places where it was formerly Christian. Now they're some of the richest countries and the most democratic countries in the world, and so now you have the ability to think about these things that make no sense now that we've thrown off the label of Christianity.
Yeah, and I like at the end of this argument, this is the second one, right? Where you mentioned the Chesterton quote, and there's another quote I think from Chesterton too. But then they talk about history and moral ignorance and that kind of stuff, and he speaks up for medieval philosophers,
Hmm.
and that's refreshing to see in a book, because they all of them, whether they're Jewish, Christian, and Muslim, in that era, they were, as he says, they were rational to a fault, while most modern philosophers since the Enlightenment have attacked reason in like every other direction. I'm on 142 at this point. And then, for almost the whole Western philosophy for the last 2 centuries has been an attack on reason. And maybe I do need to go into academia and start publishing my own philosophy. Now that I can breathe, this sinus surgery, I've got like the mental energy of 2 of me from like a month ago. So watch out, people.
That's a dangerous idea.
I'm going to be on the march. It's like the same ideas, but like faster, and I can hold the thought longer. Watch out. I got to share the good news.
Oh boy, that's a scary thought.
So I thought I'd like that, and then he flows into, unless you have comments in there, it flows into the third argument, which is the argument from data, from moral experience. That was, he already talked about that. We didn't even.
There's a whole chapter dedicated to that. So
he says, okay, we're going to talk about that. So let's move on to the fourth one, and that's the moral language one, which I thought was really the strongest argument. The strongest argument against relativists, because he's basically saying, listen to what you guys say. You're one of us. He's not saying necessarily we're right. The moral absolutes are right. He's just saying, look at your language. If we're arguing about morality, even relativist quarrel, we don't just fight about our feelings, how does this affect me or how it affects you? We fight over what is right and what is wrong. And he says, that if you believe there's a right and wrong, then it shows you believe in an absolute moral code, whatever that is. And he says in the middle of 143, if relativism were true, moral arguments would be impossible. We'd just be arguing about feelings. You're wrong, I'm right. I feel that you're wrong. I feel that you're right. And you argue about all this stuff, but you couldn't acknowledge that there's anything that's true.
Because that goes back, to her earlier arguments, because she was saying, there's really no, objective morality. It's just our own feelings about things. So if that's true, we wouldn't even be able to say, like he says, you're wrong, no, I'm right. He's saying, if you really believed in that ideology that there is no absolute morality, you would just say, well, I feel lousy about that. No, I feel fine about it. It would just be opinion judgments. Just be, no, this is my opinion about things. But of course, we don't talk like that. We have our language because we have an understanding of a moral truth. There's something higher than, ourselves and higher than like the words we say that we're calling upon when we use language. And so there must be some sort of moral absolutes. And we all believe that. And so it's reflected in our language.
Yeah, and it is reflected in the language of the moral relativists. That's the whole point. It shows the need for universal, objective, unchanging principles. We can't have, without that, we can't have any moral arguments at all, as he says in 44. And it's just really true. And they talk about, what I really like is this little exchange, is kind of an aside, where they're talking about, his arguments versus her arguments. And he's like, well, if it's true, it's, arguments, he says arguments are not private property like warts. They're public proofs. It's like science. And if it's true, if everything proved to be true is true, that is, and whenever you debate or you discuss these things with a relativist or a modern leftist, you have to at first establish that fact that everything proved to be true is true. And it's just so weird that there's so many people in media and have a following will not accept that.
Yeah,
if it's proved to be true, it's true. Period. And if you're proved to be wrong, you're wrong, and you're always wrong about that. Change your mind, but if you keep saying the wrong stuff, you're still wrong. It's not just there's no my truth.
Yeah.
Unless you prove it. If you prove it, then it's our truth. There is no my truth. It's our truth. I keep telling the story about that judge who I showed case law. I said, judge's case says you got to rule this way. You have to rule the way that I want you to rule. And she says, I don't need your law, Mr. Bishop. I said, it's not my law, my law. I'm being like overly dramatic. Well, I thought it was everybody's law. It's your law. It's my law. It's their law. It's everybody's law. And thankfully, she had a good sense of humor, and she knew I wasn't just mocking her. And that's enough out of you, Mr. Bishop, with a smile.
That's funny.
I'm really against you, so I understand that, but don't tell me it's not your law. Your law is.
Well, that's sort of
her law was, I'm the judge, and you lose.
Yeah. Well, that's sort of the argument I made. I ended up writing that essay for the ISI scholarship I think I was telling you about last week about, the importance of liberal education and stuff. That was essentially my main argument. Is I pulled a quote from Newman, St. Newman, about how the liberal education is designed to provide students like an idea of the truth in all of its branches. So you get an idea of the truth,
Yeah,
and so the argument that I was making throughout is that essentially what the modern education system does is it removes any sense of like the core truth. We don't have that. We can't really talk about the purpose of things. It's just explaining, oh, here's what something is, here's where it came from. That's the information they're giving to people. And they're encouraging students not to use that information to look at the truth, but to use that information, their perspectives, to go out and make their own truth. And that's
yeah,
really the problem. It's a completely backwards system. Instead of using perspectives of the truth, you're using perspectives and these facts and whatever to go out and build something new instead of connecting it to the source. And so it's completely disassociated from, whatever came before. And it's just this entirely different thing that and that's why we can't agree on anything. That's why society, that's why liberal education is so important for a free society, because we all have our own conceptions of the truth that are entirely different from one another. We can't agree on anything. And it's like the author says, many times throughout here, that if we don't have any common ground, then the only way we can prove our arguments is by forcing them onto people. There's no discussion that can be had. But I think it's that exact argument that you're making with that judge.
yes. I lost the battle, but won the war. Uh, you should never ruled against me on that issue again. But
Well, there you go.
she was in too far to get to pull herself back.
Oh, that's
But
funny.
it was a ruling on a preliminary hearing,
Hmm.
and we both knew that because she was an associate circuit judge at the time, she could dismiss the case. I could just reissue it, and it goes to a different judge.
Hmm. There you go.
Difference. Although she ended up causing 3 people to go to trial that would have never gone to trial, and got prison time, more
Wow.
prison time than they would have otherwise, because they thought she was right.
Oh.
So like one was a really funny trial. Funny for me, not for him. I'll tell this as an aside, just because I think the listener wants to
Sure.
hear it.
Yeah, no, I'm sure.
So one of them was a stealing case out of a Marshall's in South County. The guy had a long record, so it was called a stealing third. So your third stealing offense is a felony, and then you can enhance it if you had a whole bunch of other felonies. And so he was looking at some significant time
Hmm.
for essentially what would have otherwise been a misdemeanor stealing. So he's charged with this felony stealing. He's just a career thief.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you walk by anything; it's just to steal it. And like the Terminator, he would not stop. He would not have pity or remorse. He would absolutely not stop until he steals whatever it is that's not bolted down. So anyway, but he's otherwise a fairly pleasant guy
Yeah.
as far as he interacted with us. But anyway, so he went to Marshall's and he stuck. This is my favorite quote from one of my jury trials. He stuck a pair of shoes down his pants, like right in the front, like he had baggy
Oh.
pants, and he stuck the shoes so they're on his waistband. He had a big baggy shirt and a jacket, so he put that over the shoes. And he's walking out the front. So he walks past the registers, and there's like 2 security people saw him do it.
Mhm.
So he takes the shoes out, throws them down, and runs outside. And so, but under Missouri law, if you're, it's not the elements of stealing are if you appropriate somebody's property with the intent to permanently deprive them of that property, and you evidence that, then you're guilty of stealing. So you
Mhm.
don't have to get out the doors. Some thieves think they have to take it out the doors. You don't. Once you've concealed on your person, there's case law on it, and you concealed it with the intent to not pay for it later, which he did
Mhm.
because he passed the registers, but he didn't leave the store. So he was insisting that he was not guilty because he didn't leave the store.
Mhm.
So the judge, because she felt bad for this guy, and she had a certain left-leaning philosophy about certain people being charged with felonies that would otherwise be misdemeanors. Anyway, she dismissed it. She discharged it. Well, I got reissued, and at this point, I'm motivated.
Mhm.
Reissue it, got him bound over for a trial. He had another hearing, and of course, he lost it because the other judge was like, "Well, the law is clear. You put it on your pants. You can't say you didn't intend to keep it." So we had a jury trial because he was insisting. This judge, first judge, who's now retired, was right. And so in my closing argument, I said these words,
Oh
my
no.
favorite words: "Ladies and gentlemen, if we know anything, we know that if a man puts something down his pants, he intends to keep it." I had the judges up there, kind of covered his mouth, not to smile, and the bailiff is almost outwardly laughing. Had a couple snickers from the jurors. And they were out deliberating less than 15 minutes, guilty.
Yeah. Oh, that's a
And
good line.
I loved it. I thought that was
Mhm.
really great. Um, I'll have to look him up, see if I'm sure he's out of prison now because it's been a long time ago. But there's a couple other guys too that she went out on a limb for these guys and they got convinced that she was right. I'm like, well, sometimes the judge is wrong.
Yeah.
Anyway, so what are we
Yes.
talking about? The
We're talking
next
about the
argument.
argument from language. I want to make another
Yeah, yeah,
point
the
there.
language stuff. Wait, I have other thoughts.
Oh,
Wait, where were they?
I
Go
don't
ahead.
know. But I was going to say, like, with the point on the relativists using very absolute moral language, I think that's something, to give the left at least a little bit of credit for, is they're very, very good at using language to make people believe that they're 100% right. I mean,
Yeah.
you're really seeing that now with, I'm sure you saw, but the University of Florida just eliminated all of their DEI positions. Like every single one of them. They saved like $5 million for this university by eliminating all of them.
Can you
Uh,
believe $5 million
mhm.
completely down the toilet for however many years that
Yeah.
was? Every year, $5 million. What are
Mhm.
these people doing?
Yeah.
They were doing nothing.
Hmm.
I mean, what were they doing?
Yes. But I think the forthcoming decision to remove all those positions, it might have influenced them admitting me into the university as one of the two schools that has admitted me into their grad programs. If I had to guess,
Well,
but now
not
you
fired yet. I guess they were just fired. And now
yes,
they get 12 weeks severance pay.
yeah.
You get more jobs like that.
But now you're seeing like everybody's outraged about that, or at least a lot of the leftists are, because it's like, oh well now Jim Crow's gonna come back, and you guys don't believe in diversity, and you don't believe in these moral goods, because the left has gotten so good at saying that this is inherently a good thing. It is by definition a good thing. And you see there's all kinds of other issues, is that they're very good at using that language to make it a moral good and have no other way about it. And I think that's exactly what you're seeing there.
Yeah, and well, I'm going off on another side, but yeah, but the obvious response to that is Jim Crow can't come back in Florida. The Republicans are in charge. They're, and that's what the Republicans should say. What?
Yeah.
We're not bringing back Jim Crow. We don't want these Democrats in charge again. What they do, and then that they need to take the gloves off like the
Mhm.
Democrats do.
Yeah. But I mean,
They
that's another point, is that Republican is a bad word. I mean, I see that all the time on campus, is like, oh, you're a Republican. Oh, that means you're a fascist. Oh, that means you hate these people, blah, 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 because they've made the definition of the word into something that's deplorable. And I think they're very good at doing that. And it's not a good thing to be doing, of course, but they're very skilled, I think, at making language in that way.
yeah, skilled. I mean, what is the Satan is very very clever.
Yes.
Evil
Yeah.
people are without any morals,
Hmm.
and moral relativists are always great at misleading people because they don't believe that what they're saying are lies.
Hmm.
Because the ends justifies the means. That's really that's the parallel, the two twins.
Hmm.
The leftist philosophy is number one is moral relativism or situational ethics, and the other side is the ends justifies the means,
Yeah.
which is slightly different, because it doesn't matter how much we lied about Kavanaugh, we were trying to keep him off the bench. It doesn't matter how much we lied about Clarence Thomas, we were trying to keep him off the bench. It
Mm.
doesn't. The ends were appropriate.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter that we lied about masks and 6 foot distancing for whatever reason. I don't know.
Yeah.
So, next argument,
Yes.
which is what is the next argument? It was a lot of self-contradiction argument, which I think was a lot what they talked about before. He just calls, a relativistic morality illogical logic.
Hmm.
It's oxymoronic.
Hmm.
Did you call me a moron? Yes, is what the answer should have been. So it's like, um, she makes a counterpoint. Well, why can't morality be gentle instead of hard? Free ideals instead of impositions. Why suggestions? And he talks about God. The 10 Commandments being God's top 10 values. But she says, so you're arguing that absolutism is inherent in the very sense of morality. Of course, he says yes. But he doesn't really expand on it too much. He talks about Anselm's theory of the existence of God,
Hmm.
which is he mentions that there's a hidden assumption that that is false that you can even know the true nature of God. But he says you can know the essence of human morality, so therefore it must exist, I guess,
Mhm.
is part of it. I don't know. I don't know. They spent like half a page on this
Yeah.
argument. What do you think about that
I don't know.
argument?
It's not enough time, I think, to devote to it. I think his opening argument is better. Back on page 145, he says, "My point is that the alternative to absolute morality is not some other kind of morality, any other kind of morality, because there is no other kind of morality, but no morality at all. So if you don't
Right.
have any absolutes, then it is exactly what the relativist says that they are. It's just feelings or
Right.
values, conventions, consensus, games, or social approval. So it's like
Yeah.
if you don't have any absolute arguments, then the system just is nothing. It's leaves in the wind. It just immediately blows away. So I think that is somewhat convincing, but I think they get bogged down in the weeds a little bit, or they don't get bogged down enough. I don't think because they don't go into enough detail to flesh out what he's talking about when he's kind of drawing it to Anselm's ontological argument and stuff like that, and they kind of just gloss over that. I would have liked more time on that, I think, but I think that the general idea is good.
I kind of sense that he probably had 20 pages on St. Anselm's theory, but
Yes.
his editor said, cut all that shit out. We don't and we're like, hey, well, I was not kind of interested in that, but he just said that it's there, and then they moved on to the
Hmm.
next argument, which is practical self-contradiction, which I thought was it's not not an argument for
Hmm.
absolute as much as it is argument against relativism, which I think is a good one,
Hmm.
which is very similar to other arguments we already talked about, which is the fact that relativists act like absolutists when you do them an injustice. They say no fair, and
Hmm.
that's so true. How is that not fair? If you're a relativist, you have to compute whether the other is fair for the other
Hmm.
side. I mean, like, why are you imposing your morality on somebody else? And relativists, have a theory of what is right or what is wrong, and they will impose that upon you.
Hmm.
But they'll say, but yeah, we have to, and that they're trying to codify it in this hierarchy of victimhood that they have.
Hmm.
They call that intersectionality,
There you go.
whatever it is. They're trying to codify it.
Hmm.
Uh, so, like, if I'm a black female lesbian, I'm like a superhero. But if I'm a heterosexual white guy, I'm
Hmm.
screwed. You know, and it's really fascinating. It's part of that DEI curriculum.
Hmm.
But they're trying to figure out how to enforce the
Hmm.
relativist moral philosophy, and it's really impossible to do.
Hmm.
And I like this exchange they had on 147 where he says, "Would you like to convince us absolutists that relativism is right and absolutism is wrong?" And the liberal character says, "Sure." He says, "Really right and really wrong?" And she says, "Yes." Then there is a real right and real wrong. But that's what absolutism says.
Hmm.
Like you can't try to convince us we're wrong and you're right and still say there's moral relativism. I mean,
Yeah.
it's such a simple argument that just kind of goes over their heads.
Yeah.
You have a religion too, dummy.
Hmm.
You just don't have any ordained priests.
Yeah.
They're not ordained
Hmm.
or imposed.
Well, I,
Uh,
I like how they end that discussion there. So after he says there is a real right and wrong, she says, "All right, no, then. There is nothing right or wrong, but thinking makes it so." And so then, of course, he responds, then there's nothing wrong with being an absolutist and nothing right with being a relativist. If you really believe in that ideology you put forward, you can't prove it. You can't argue in favor of it. You just have to accept what this other person said and go along with it. But of course, they're not going to accept that because they don't actually believe this because it's an impossible thing to think. And I think going back to his earlier argument, a little bit earlier, he says, relativists act like absolutists when you do them an injustice. And I think that's very true with the whole, preaching about tolerance, especially what you were talking about earlier. We have to tolerate everybody's opinions, every religion, everything like that, until we don't like them. I think you see that a
right,
lot with a lot of these relativists. They're perfectly fine, saying, "Oh, well, Islam's a beautiful religion. Oh, Judaism's a beautiful religion. Oh, Hinduism's a beautiful religion." But these Christians are trying to ruin our country and enforce their values on us. And it's like, what are you talking about? You can't have it both ways. You can't appreciate everything and then pick out particular enemies out of these groups that you're supposed to tolerate all of them. I think that's exactly the point he's making here too.
Well, and also, especially with the rainbow crowd, they're
Hmm.
all for Palestine, it's like, wait a second, they'll throw you off a building, dummy. I
Yeah.
mean, they would
Yeah.
literally throw you off a building.
Well, it's that exact thing you're talking about with like the hierarchy of oppression is that they believe that any of these, quote unquote oppressed groups therefore have the same moral values and have like the same, righteousness in the grand scheme of things. So of course they place, the LGBT on the same level as the Palestinians because they're both being oppressed, the LGBT oppressed by the straight people, the Palestinians oppressed by the Israelis. Therefore, we have to agree. We're on the same side. We're both the oppressed people. And so you have these people, the queers for Palestine is a group out there flying rainbow flags. If they tried that in Palestine, the Palestinians would not have any of that. They just
Yeah.
can't wrap their minds around it because they think it's this universal hierarchy that they're brothers in arms.
Yeah, and you got to figure it. And I admit I can't get in the mind of the Palestinians, but they got to be thinking, all right, first we kill the Jews, then we kill these fags. I mean, don't you think that's what they're thinking? But first the Jews,
Yes.
then the gays,
Mm-hmm.
and those men there in those dresses.
Mm-hmm.
They're next.
Yeah.
But they're all protesting together. But their philosophy, their religion is so against it, and their religion justifies the murder of homosexuals. I mean, the truly devout Muslims. I mean, it's not an aberration that they think that there's capital punishment for homosexual acts. I mean, that's anyway. So yeah, it's bizarro, but they're trying to codify it, through some sort of filter of oppression. But anyway, back to the book. Sorry about that.
No, it's all right.
Oh no, that's really offensive that he said that. What was a movie I just watched where it was an English person smoking cigarettes and they used that word, the fag word, but that's what they call cigarettes.
Yes.
Old English movie.
Was it the play that you saw here? Because that
Oh,
happened.
that's what it was.
Yes.
That's what it was. Eli was like, he's a fags. Yeah, that's right. It was the play. Thank you. I thought it was a movie. I'm like, what? I remember. It's like some sort of goofy story. Yeah. The story was goofy. I will have to say that. The actors were very good. I was very impressed with all the lady actors. That's what you would call them, the female actors.
Actresses, I think, is the typical word.
Can you say that? I didn't think that. I thought they couldn't.
No,
say
they've tried to remove that. I think now it's just actors, and that's what they did. They did a production of 12 Angry Men, but they changed it to 12 Angry Jurors. That was last semester. Yeah.
Probably because they couldn't get any decent male.
That's true. That's true. It was like half women in that one.
Like anyway, but I thought about that storyline, and I'm going to say something offensive.
Okay.
All right. So the storyline is what, five sisters
Yes.
In Ireland in what, the
1930s.
1930s. So you have five sisters, single sisters in one home with not a father, right? So the oldest sister's kind of like in charge, and some uncle that was a priest who came back from the Africa.
Well, that's their brother.
That's their brother. That's right.
Yes. The play is Dancing at Lughnasa, by the way, for anyone who's curious and wants to look this up themselves.
So what my objection is, and this is where the offensive take is, if you're going to have five sisters, single sisters in Ireland, who can't find anybody to marry them, they must be cast as ugly people. Okay. You can't have five relatively attractive actresses where there's anybody going to believe that these chicks couldn't get a husband, for crying out loud. And they like have no hope of ever getting.
I think the reason is one of the sisters had a child out of wedlock, and so they're outcasts.
That's so bullshit. I mean, that was bullshit then. Pardon my language. But I mean, because one sister had a child out of wedlock, none of the other hot chicks are going to get married? Are you crazy? Even she's going to find somebody. I mean, come on.
It's just really weird. This is a really argument to take on this.
Well, I mean, you didn't see that? It's like, I'm like, this is completely unbelievable that none of these five sisters could get a husband. That was just unbelievable. And then the priest character coming back from Uganda, and he's literally gone native, right?
Yes.
But he also has some sort of weird, of course, the acting was challenging. I hope that, I mean, and he's a good college kid, I'm sure. I don't mean to be critical because I'm sure he's just, into it and he really tried hard. I don't mean to criticize a college student who's just doing
Yes.
a local play. And he did fine. The
Mhm.
material was hard. I mean, I think for
Yes.
the guys, I think the material for the guys was harder.
Yes.
But anyway, um, I didn't understand that entire storyline, you
Hmm.
know, because the missions there were pretty successful in
Mhm.
converting them to Catholicism, not converting the priests to whatever the Ugandan religion was. That didn't make any sense to me. Oh, it's scandalous. Why isn't he going to say mass? Well, because he'd probably do it in a toga or something. No, that's not, they don't wear togas there. What do they wear there? I don't know what they wear there. I don't know anything about Uganda. My Lord. It
Well,
was
there you go. It's
it was such a bizarre play. And the actresses did a great job. And the actors did the male actors did a solid job,
mhm.
but the female actresses did very good. So it was entertaining, but the casting was terrible. They should have had like these ogre, and they're even believable. Yeah, nobody's gonna marry them, and they're hopeless. They're gonna starve to death. I mean, that's society. I mean, if you can't get a job at the factory and you don't have land to
Mhm.
raise food, yeah, you're in deep trouble in
Yes.
19 Ireland.
This
You know,
rant makes no sense to anyone who has not seen Dancing at Lughnasa, the obscure play about an Irish family set in the 1930s. This is such a weird tangent that you've gone
I'm,
on.
I'm pretty sure that our listener is familiar with the material.
Well, yes, that one. We have more than one listener.
Well, that other listener is gonna. You probably watch one of these things at YouTube. Probably it's a short play.
Yeah.
I don't know, it was a weird choice of material
Yes.
by the theater department of Truman State University. I'm not sure. I've never heard of it before.
Neither did I.
Um, but thought provoking. Anyway,
Yes.
back to one of my favorite
Hmm.
quotes from the book, talking about how relativists are really kind of missionaries for their
Hmm.
own philosophy. And he says, let's see, like he says, we're missionaries, but we admit it. And
Hmm.
it is, again, the quote here on 148, you are too, though, but you don't admit it. You relativists preach against preaching. You're on a mission against missionaries. You're missionaries without a religion. You're like the joke about cloning a Jehovah's Witness and a Unitarian together. You get someone who goes door to door to say nothing at all. That's so great because a Unitarian has nothing to say about religion. Unitarians, but Jehovah's Witnesses, you got to respect those dudes, man. They go to door for that religion.
Yeah,
They got stones,
that is
and,
true.
and they're absolutists, aren't they? The
Yeah.
ones that don't even like Halloween, right? Aren't they?
Oh, I don't know.
I think Jehovah's Witnesses. I don't think their kids can go trick or treating.
Hmm. I don't know that.
That's torture. Could you imagine trying to convince your kid, no, you can't go trick or treat, get a sack of candy for nothing because God said so. Like, although, when you actually look into Halloween, it's kind of a weird tradition.
Well, I mean, it comes from the Catholics because
Yeah,
it's an extension of All Saints Day, All
yeah.
Hallows
I mean,
Eve.
like the popular culture around it with
That's
like
true.
the ghouls and the horror movies and all that kind of stuff. It really is kind of borderline satanic.
That is true. I can
Yep.
see that. Yeah.
Oh, it's just anyway. So I don't know if there's anything else to say. I
Yeah.
think that's
Well,
big.
I do like that quote. I think that's a good place to end. Because that's exactly what the relativists say is that they want it to be everywhere. It's exactly what you were talking about earlier with the whole codification of these morals, but it's really a moral of nothing, right? It's this idea that everything's transient, and you all have to believe that everything's transient and everything's always changing, and that leaves us with nothing at all. You're just pushing like non-existent values on someone. You're pushing a system that just isn't a system at all, and yet it's everywhere and it's increasingly popular. I think because they're so good at convincing people that it is some sort of absolute truth, even though there's no real meaning behind the words that they say.
Yes.
Yes. All
Good
right.
summary. Good
Thank you.
summary.
Thank you. Well, do you have any other final thoughts? Do you want to talk about another play? Have you seen any other plays?
No, but I saw Dune 2
Oh, did
last
you?
with your brother and your mother.
Did you see the first one?
We did a couple of years ago, I guess
Yeah,
it
yeah.
was. And
I
then
want to see that. I haven't seen it yet, so don't spoil it. But
I had to watch like a YouTube summary of
mm,
part one because I was like, wait a second, I can't remember.
yeah,
It was good. It was
yeah.
good. Yeah, you really have to pay attention.
Hmm.
A lot of plots and subplots
Yeah.
and this and that.
Well, I know the first one was really slow, but I kind of enjoy that. I like the build up and the fantasy world building and stuff like that. So,
Well, there must be a part three.
well, I'm trying to remember how many books they are, but those two movies are just the first book in the Dune
Yes,
series, and there's like 10 books or something. I don't think they'll do all of them. But they're planning on making a whole bunch of them.
yeah. I mean, if they keep making money, it
Mhm.
was really beautiful. I mean,
Yeah.
the cinematography, and I'm not a huge fan of Zendaya, but I think
Hmm.
I'm becoming a fan of Zendaya.
Hmm.
I thought she was great in Spider-Man. I've only seen her in Spider-Man, really,
Yeah.
and I don't know if I've seen anything else
Yes.
with her in it. But and I thought she was great at that.
Yeah.
Um, and she does a really solid job in this one. I thought the first movie she didn't have much of a role, if I
Yeah.
remember.
She only kind of came in at the end. Yeah.
And then she's like, "Oh, this mysterious person," but
Yes.
she has a much bigger role in this one.
Mhm.
And, that Timothy Shamalama Ding Dong.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
he's really good. The lead guy.
Yeah, so there you go. Well, I guess that's a movie review from us here at
Yeah,
Unlimited
you should go. You
Opinions.
should go see
Yes.
Dune Part Two. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's pretty
All
good.
right. Well, I think with that, unless you have anything else you want to add on to this episode, um, that has been season 7, episode 9 of Unlimited Opinions. I've been Adam Bishop, and you are rubbing your chin as if you're thinking of things to say, so we can draw this out even longer.
I'm still Mark Bishop though.
All right. Well, that was
For better or worse.
quite an episode.
Well, how did I get on the play?
Because you were, because you the word for cigarette.
Oh,
Yes.
well, you're the one that clued me back into the play. I forgot where I got it from.
Well, yeah,
I blame you.
I don't think I'm to blame for that.
And your mother was unhappy with my theory that I share with Eli
What's
about
that?
unbelievable. The whole thing I just said to this
Oh,
episode.
yes, yes.
Yeah. She's like, I don't think you're supposed to talk that way.